listening to the Esq.Marketing podcast, hosted by Matthew Lauren, president of Esq.Marketing, where he features successful solo and SMB law firms from all over the United States. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey, I'm Matthew Lauren, and you're listening to the Esq.Marketing podcast, where I feature successful professionals in the legal marketing industry. Today's episode is brought to you by Rankings.io and the Rankings podcast with host Chris Dreyer. And speaking of successful professionals, today I have the pleasure of speaking with Allison Shields. Allison is president of Legalese Consulting. She works with solo practitioners as well as small to mid-sized law firms that want to improve their practice and take it to the next level. Allison, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. And I will just throw in a little note that I'm in the process of changing my name. I got married last year. And so having Shields as my last name professionally for many years, it's taking a while to kind of transition. But my new last name is Johs. So if you see things out there with Allison Johs, Johs, don't be confused because it's still me.
Congratulations on getting married. And I noticed the Johs at the end of your name. I wasn't sure. I saw Allison Shields and Allison Shields Johs. That's really cool.
Thank you.
So tell me more about Legalese Consulting. I was really interested to read over your website, and I'm just interested in what you do.
Sure. So I started this kind of grew out of my experience as a lawyer and a law firm manager. And I built this consulting practice to help lawyers to run their practices better, because from what I was seeing, not only within the firms that I had worked in, but in firms of my friends and so on, was, that there was sort of a gap in what we learn in law school. We learn how to practice law, but not so much how to run a business, and certainly not how to market ourselves and our law firms. So I kind of took the pieces that I liked the best of what I did as a lawyer, and that was working with people and doing the marketing and coming up with good ideas, and also figuring out ways for the firm to work more efficiently and more effectively. And I kind of rolled that into my own consulting practice. So I help lawyers now with how they run their business and how they attract clients.
That's a common theme that I hear about not learning how to run a business in law school. And was there something in your experience in being a lawyer and running a practice before you started Legalese? Is there sort of an aha moment that you thought, a lot of attorneys don't know how to do this type of work?
Yeah, so I started to get very involved with just law practice issues in general, and doing a lot of research for my firm, and reading things by David Meister and other people, joining the ABA Law Practice Division, which I'm now very involved with, and just trying to learn and realizing that the problems that I had seen in the firms that I had worked in, including the firm that I was in at the time, were not unique, that they were really across the board. And I started looking at, what is the reason for that? And part of the reason is because we're never taught how to do any of those things, and lawyers typically, unlike a lot of other professions, you're a great lawyer and then you move up to be the managing partner, which is a completely different job, right? So a lot of managing partners kind of don't really know how to run the business any better than anybody else. They just either were unlucky enough to get stuck in the position, or they were so good at what they did before that somebody decided to put them into a completely different job, right?
So there's a lot of factors that impact how well a business runs, one of those being the types of clients you deal with. Can you speak more to that, about how the types of clients that an attorney chooses to work for can impact the profitability of the business and how it functions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the client is the foundation of your entire business as a lawyer, right? So everything that the law firm does is based upon the clients that law firm represents. So if you're choosing clients who aren't going to pay, then it's just not sustainable, right? And if they're also taking up more resources than they should take up, that's also not sustainable. And when I say taking up resources, I mean, even if you're billing by the hour, which now a lot of firms, thankfully, are starting to get away from. But there's a finite amount of resources that should go into each client engagement. And part of that is based on what the client is paying you. And if a client is paying you X, but they're taking up 2X worth of resources, whether that's time or energy or other kinds of resources in the firm, that's not going to be a good long-term strategy. You're not going to be profitable if every client is taking up twice as much time and energy and effort as they should be taking up. If they're even doing things like not being respectful or appropriate in dealing with your staff, so many of us know of that nasty client who calls up and has not a nice word to say to anybody, is abusive to the staff. That demoralizes your staff. That makes them, not want to work hard for that particular client, but it just makes their life more difficult in general. And they're not going to be giving forth their best effort even to your other clients. And I think bad clients, what I call bad clients, sort of distract the entire firm from the good clients, the ones who would refer you business, the ones who are, no trouble at all, who pay their bill without complaining, who give you the information that you need when you need it, and they'll refer other people who are like them, as opposed to the bad client who, the best case scenario is they walk away on their own, right? Worst case scenario is they stay, make your life miserable, don't pay you, and then they refer you other people who are just like them, who are going to have the same kind of attitudes and behaviors. So it affects everything across the board, from your productivity to your profitability to your staff. It's really everything.
There's probably a point at which all attorneys learn how to spot clients like that from their own experience. Even us in digital marketing, I can spot clients that we deal with now that are probably going to be difficult to deal with. But what about for sort of the newer attorneys, or maybe they're just starting to kind of learn some of those pain points? What are the red flags that they can see on someone who's probably not going to be the best client to take on, even if they're in the practice area that the attorney specializes in, or has a case that's really attractive? How do they spot if that person's not going to be a good client to take on?
Yeah, so to me, the first thing that I always tell my clients when we're talking about this issue is to trust your gut. We all have these instincts, even if you're a new attorney. And I always say, pay attention to your instincts, because if something feels off in the beginning, or you're just not comfortable with the person, usually that's a big red flag. And you should think twice about taking on that client, or at least examine what is beyond, or below that sort of gut feeling that something's not right. You may be just getting the feeling that the client's holding back information from you or not telling you the truth, which obviously is not a great foundation for a good and lasting client relationship. Some other things to look out for, anybody who is too hyper focused on money. Of course, money is always going to be an issue. Nobody likes talking about it. But the reality is you deserve to get paid for the value of the service that you're providing to the client. And a decent client, even if they're cash strapped, is going to understand that they need to pay for its services. So anybody who's nitpicking from day one, if they're balking at your fees right away, and if you have a conversation around it and they don't seem to be letting go, or they really want to negotiate you down, that's a red flag, because that client is going to be scrutinizing every single bill and complaining about anything that you charge them. And you're going to spend more time fighting with them about the bill, than doing anything else. I always say, beware of clients who say, well, I can't pay you, but I can refer you all this great business, which sounds like, okay, that might be good, especially if I'm starting out. I don't have that many clients. I don't know where my next client's going to come from. So now I've got somebody who says they're going to refer me business, but they haven't even worked with me yet. So they don't really know how good I am. I'm always wary of that sort of promise. It never seems to come to fruition. And, those clients, if they really had such great contacts, you have to wonder why they can't just pay you a reasonable fee to begin with. If the client has gone through a whole bunch of lawyers before, that's a red flag. Why are they ditching all of these other lawyers? Or have they sued, or are they known for making complaints or grievances against other lawyers? I mean, you don't want to be the next one on the list, right? So if somebody already has that mindset, you have to really be careful about what you think they might be doing kind of to you. And then I also say, hey, take a look at your current client list, right? And think about the attributes of your best clients and the attributes of your worst clients. And see kind of what the patterns are. Maybe you've taken on some of these clients that aren't the best fit for you. And try to think back to that initial consultation. Were there red flags that you ignored? Kind of what were they? What are the things that make a good client a good client? And what are the things that make a bad client a bad client? In your experience, it may be a little bit different for everybody. I mean, some of those major things that I just talked about are pretty much true across the board. It's a rare lawyer who's going to say, yeah, I really want to work with the litigious client, but there may be nuances in your individual practice where you say, this isn't exactly the right fit, or, clients that exhibit these behaviors or use these kind of words or this kind of language at the initial consultation, those clients have become the ones that are not the best fit for me. And so you can sort of make a pre-qualifying process for yourself where you say, first I listen to my gut, but then I need something to kind of back it up. And if you've got other people in your firm, even if it's just you and a legal assistant or something, or you and a partner, or you have an associate, enlist those people in this process also. Talk to them about, who do you think are the best and worst clients in our firm, and why do you think that? And what did you see? I had a client that I was working with a couple of years ago who said, I'm really bad at this. I'm really bad at identifying. Either I just ignore my gut, or I know I'm making a bad decision and I make it anyway. But my assistant can identify from the first time that they, interact with the client, whether this is going to be a bad client for me. And so if she tells me don't take the client, I don't take the client. I mean, that was how we ultimately worked it out. Like, okay, well, what is she identifying? Even if it's subconsciously, that makes this person a bad client. And then you can kind of have a list, and it seems more objective, right? If you say clients with these attributes are not a good fit for my practice. And then you can kind of check the client against your list, whether it's, mental or physical list, and see how does this client measure up. And some of it is retroactive, right? After the client gets into your practice, they may put a good impression in the beginning and you didn't pick up on some of these things, but as time goes on, you realize that maybe something that seemed innocuous in the beginning was something that you should have paid attention to. And so you kind of add that to the list for the next time.
I love those tips, because it's just like doing market research and identifying who your ideal customer is. And for attorneys, it's just identifying who their ideal client is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a whole process that I go through with my clients on identifying who their ideal client is. And lawyers are not, a lot of times they don't think strategically about it. So sometimes it's easier to go from the bad client perspective, because they can tell you right away who their worst clients are. And they can list a lot of the reasons why, and then we can go back and look at red flags and make that list. But you want to make the other list too, right? Well, who are the best clients? Where do they come from? Which is a really important piece too. Sometimes we are tempted to take on a bad client because somebody that we respect or somebody that we're close with is the referral source. And you don't want to disappoint that referral source, but it may be just a matter of having a conversation about that with that referral source about what your best clients look like and what kinds of work you want them to refer to you. And so maybe it's not even hurting their feelings. It's just they think they're trying to be helpful, and you can help them to be more helpful by educating them on these are the kinds of cases and the kinds of clients that I work the best with, right? But you've got to take the time to think strategically about that and to identify, well, who are my best clients and why do I think they're my best clients? And then where are those clients coming from, and how do I get more of them? How do I go to those referral sources or go to the places where my ideal clients hang out so that I can get in front of them? And that will bring me more good clients. And listen, the more good clients that come into your practice, the easier it is to say no to the bad ones, right? Because you're now not worried because you've got more of a pipeline, and ways that are reliable and consistent to bring in the kinds of business that you want.
Allison, is there ever a time where maybe an attorney who doesn't have a lot of clients yet, or just needs the business, they should take on a client maybe they are not so sure about?
I think there are times, look, sometimes you have to do what you have to do to survive, but you want to do it with your eyes wide open. And I think you need to really look at that sort of list of bad client attributes and say which ones are the worst ones that are absolute no's, and which ones are maybes or can be tempered if they have other positive attributes. So in other words, maybe I'm a newer lawyer and I can see that this case is going to be a great experience for me, right? So I'm willing to do it for a discounted rate because I'm going to be able to get the experience out of this to get other better clients later on. But I have to be making that decision in the beginning, understanding that I may get paid less or I'm taking a discounted rate for the experience. Because otherwise what happens is as time goes on, you start to resent, and maybe you're not doing the best work for that client because you're saying, well, I'm getting a lesser rate than I'm getting from these other clients. You have to be all in from the beginning and remind yourself that the other piece of your compensation, if you want to look at it that way, for this particular case is that I'm getting experience I wouldn't necessarily get otherwise. I would say there are certain things that are definite no's. You never want to take on a client that's going to be abusive. To me, that's a hard stop, no matter how kind of desperate you are, because it's just demoralizing and it makes it very difficult to do your job. And I think you just end up, it's harder to attract good clients when you're in that kind of headspace where you're being abused by a client.
That's a good point.
Some clients you may say, okay, I see from the first interaction, from the initial consultation, that this client is going to need more hand-holding. And so maybe I'm going to put mechanisms in place, or I'm going to have a conversation with this client up front about what those expectations are and how I can make that easier for me because I know this client is going to need more hand-holding. So maybe it's that we set a specific time, maybe we have an every other week status conference on the phone so that the client knows that every other week I'm going to be in touch with them, and then I'm not getting interrupted with calls all the time because the client wants to know what's happening. So thinking strategically about, okay, this situation is not ideal, but how can I make it work for me? So that maybe you can take on the client, but not in the way that you would normally take on another client.
I like how you talked about mechanisms there for setting expectations. In our line of work, we develop onboarding processes where we figure out what needs to be done and what kind of communication needs to be had with a client, as they're learning how to work with us. Is that something attorneys can do too? Can they systematize this process where each time they have a new client, instead of having to try to look for the red flags, like obviously things probably pop up and you see them right away, but if you don't notice any red flags, is there a system that could be put in place where they can set expectations early on and let the client know, hey, I only have 2 hours a week allotted for you in this time, or something like that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important, if not the most important piece of the initial consult, right? I mean, to me, yes, you obviously want to find out about the client's legal problem, and if this is a legal problem that you have the expertise to take care of, and if this client is one that you feel comfortable with representing. But I think the expectations piece is a really, really important piece, and I think it gets short shrift a lot of times. And I think by establishing those expectations up front, and some of those may be either part of your written formal engagement agreement or just something else concrete that you hand to the client so that the client understands this is what we do here. And it opens up a conversation with the client. So where you say, here's how I typically communicate with clients. Here is my policy in terms of getting back to people with telephone calls. I will always get back to you within 24 hours. It may not be, within an hour, but it will be before the end of the business day or whatever your process is, to have that conversation with clients to say, this is how I typically communicate. We do this by email. We do this by phone. This is the mechanism for setting up a meeting. If you want to set up a meeting with me, unless it's an emergency, it has to be at least 24 hours in advance. But at least having that conversation, then if you find out that the client's uncomfortable with that, then you can decide whether you want right then and there to modify your process for that client or not. Same way you would talk about whether you're willing to negotiate your fee with the client or not. And those are parameters that you have to set, and boundaries, I think, that you set with the client from the beginning. If you let the client, call you at midnight and you answer, then the client is going to expect that they can call you whenever they want and you're going to answer. But if you tell them, you can leave me a message any time of the day or night, I will get back to you within X amount of time, then the client understands. And I think if you explain to them, look, if I'm with you and I'm working on your case, you don't want me to be interrupted 6 times by other clients, right? You want me to be focusing on what I'm doing for you. And so I have to do the same for every other client. And so maybe this client needs a little more hand-holding. So you say, okay, I'm willing to, text, don't call me or email me, send me a text, because then I can just shoot you a quick text back. Whatever you're comfortable with. But I think setting up those mechanisms and really sitting down and thinking about it for yourself first, what makes the most sense for me? Would I rather have the client call me, or would I rather deal with it by email? Most of the time we get too much email. So
that comment about calling in the middle of the night, that sort of hits home for me. And it seems like part of this is setting expectations with clients, but also setting boundaries for yourself as an attorney. Like, they may feel comfortable answering calls in the middle of the night or texts or emails because they think, the client needs to hear back right away. They need to do a good job, but maybe that's not the best way to run the business, because like you said, they're just going to keep calling and calling in the middle of the night.
Right.
And eventually you might get worn down.
Right. And a lot of it, I think, is just when it's on the client's mind, they want to get it off their chest. And so if you understand where the client is coming from, and that's where I think this whole conversation around expectations is important. If you can dig below what the client is asking for at the surface to see kind of, I call them anxieties, what their underlying anxiety is, you might be able to address it another way. So if you say, look, if something comes to you in the middle of the night, definitely I want you to reach out to me. But, if it's the middle of the night, it needs to be my email, and then I will see it first thing in the morning. Then this way you've got it out, it's documented, and I can look at it when I get a chance, and I will get back to you, within whatever your parameters are for how you want to deal with email or phone calls or what have you. But, some of it is really kind of training the client.
Are there some tools that are good for that type of process, whether it's documenting the communication preferences of the client or, the whole onboarding process? Are there any tools you recommend that attorneys use?
I mean, there are so many different tools out there now. It's hard to, one of the great things that I think more lawyers should use is a client portal. Okay. And they're integrated with a lot of the practice management programs that are out there. But the client portal gives the client access to whatever you want to give them access to in their file. And it's a communications portal, and it will notify you when you get a message from the client. But it's also great because the client can log in and see, sometimes the most mundane or easiest things that the client calls about to interrupt you, they don't need to call you if they have access to it. So in other words, I don't remember when my court date is. If I can just log into the client portal and see the calendar with when my next court date is, I don't even have to bother your receptionist, because I can just log in and do it on my own, even if it's in the middle of the night. And I can see what has been filed, and I can see the status of the case, what we're waiting for. And so a lot of those questions then can be answered by the client on their own without even having to communicate directly with a person in your office. They're communicating by logging into the client portal. And then if they don't see something there, or if they have a question, oftentimes they can ask it right through the portal. So to me, that's one of the best tools that a lot of lawyers are not using, or not using well, to allow the client on their own. And everybody knows how to use computers and websites and everything now. So those excuses are kind of out the window, especially after the past year, right? Everybody's used to doing everything online. So if I can go on at 3:00 in the morning and make myself feel better because I can see when the next court date is, then I don't have to bother anybody.
That's a great tip. Empower the client. You've been listening to Allison Johs, president at Legalese Consulting. Allison, where can people go to learn more about your consulting firm?
So my website is lawyermeltdown.com. And so you can see where I'm coming from, right? Or I have a blog, which is at legaleseconsulting.com, and that's EASE. And you can always email me at Allison, which is ALLISON, at legaleseconsulting.com.
Awesome. Thanks for being on the show, Allison.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Esq.Marketing podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.